Despite a cheery demeanor and good nature being parts of Steven seemingly from the beginning, one could argue these qualities stemmed from his lack of awareness of the universe's complexity. His caretakers, the crystal gems, kept him ignorant of the full truth in order to preserve his innocence. But, as Steven grew up, he began to learn more about what was really going on. The seemingly emotionless and one-dimensional monsters they've been fighting actually turned out to be corrupted gems, tragic victims of a war. And that was just the first of many moral complications Steven would discover, each more personal than the last. As the revelations kept piling on, Steven grew increasingly dissatisfied with the secrets the gems kept from him. The fragmented perspective of the world that the gems set up for Steven slowly started to form a clearer, more singular picture.
What if it's like a puzzle? If we give them all the pieces, eventually they'll get the picture.
Steven Universe as a show was always about how characters communicated information to Steven. So now that he's come into his own as a leader, it's incredibly fitting that Steven Universe the movie is entirely about Steven's communication of information to others. The movie opens by asking potential newcomers if they've heard Steven's tale, espousing his compassion and selflessness to the point that he's labeled a revelation. The original theme song of the series always informed us that the people of this world, Earth, believed in him. But now the diamonds are telling us he's believed in by everyone all across the universe. He's become such a ubiquitous legend, he's worthy of his own classic Disney fairy tale style book. But before his tale can be shamelessly remade in dull and colorless live action, the plot kicks off with Steven putting out his message to the universe in the most literal manner possible. A galactic broadcast signal that literally every planet receives, even one that has been home to only one living creature for thousands of years. So whatever service this is, must be even more affordable than the starting price for Disney+. We get the impression that over the course of the past 2 years, as Steven helped reshape the universe in accordance with the inclusive ideals he preaches, our core cast delighted in retelling the stories of their self-actualizing adventures to others.
You're just in time for my favorite part of the story.
Suggesting that they've successfully achieved and completed their growth. They're done, and now it's time to tell their stories. It's a fitting opening, since the bulk of this plot is going to center on Steven trying to communicate ideals and beliefs to others, and mostly the ones who ironically aim to instill ideals and beliefs of their own in his child self in the first place. At the start of the movie, Steven is content in his current state of existence, not being able to imagine a life beyond the clear path laid out and really not wanting to. The legacy of a happily ever after as we've come to know it is freezing a moment in time, the final page, an image of pure idyllic happiness. Steven captures this by snapping a selfie with the gems as he sings about how content he'd be if he could just stop right here. His message to the universe neat, sweet, and complete. And in this moment, that's how the movie wants its viewers to feel. When we hit the end of Change Your Mind, it certainly felt like we'd reached the end of the story, achieving peaceful relations with the Diamond Authority and restoring the corrupted gems. And in Steven's meta-contextual mind, this movie shouldn't exist, and he's angry it exists. But therein lies the brilliance. Steven Universe as a series has always been about characters grappling with legacy, and that legacy was always the legacy of Steven's mom, the legacy of the past, the unseen past that occurred off-screen before the timeline of the show proper. But in this movie, although yes, the legacy of Pink Diamond is obviously still relevant, I'd argue that the events of the show become the legacy that's really being grappled with, and now the show itself is questioning its own surprising twists and turns by revisiting concepts, settings, and sequences that it showed us in episodes like The Answer, On the Run, or Last One Out of Beach City, to name a few. Like any puzzle, Steven Universe is made up of a bunch of pieces that don't seem like they fit together when viewed individually, but somehow form a cohesive whole. Something that the movie definitely draws attention to, when Pearl says,
I do say something is clearly wrong. What are all these different gems doing here in this strange place?
But the movie doesn't only focus on the inherent strangeness of Steven Universe as it's always existed. It also makes the potential of new expansions seem even weirder. It's bizarre for Steven to abruptly get a new best friend, a new best friend, a new best friend, because we're accustomed to the status quo of the series and its established roster of characters. We feel like the show is done and set in stone, and the book is closed. So who the heck is this? And the movie really plunges headfirst into that weirdness, with Spinel. Spinel's puzzle has remained unchanged for over 6,000 years, until she finally received what was apparently her final piece, the fate of Pink Diamond. the news about how her story ends. But of course, she didn't let it complete her.
That's right, I heard the story. Don't really like how it ends.
And ultimately, Steven has to accept his own seemingly completed puzzle. It's still not fully solved. It never really will be. The funny thing is, once the gem's memories are wiped, they achieve a sense of shallow completion because they are now once again wholly committed to their base functions. Homeworld would have said that Pearl, Amethyst, Ruby, Sapphire, and Spinel are already complete from inception. Puzzles that shipped in their boxes. Fully finished. Ruby existed to protect her Sapphire, Sapphire existed to see the future in a straight line, Pearl existed for her diamond, and Amethyst
Is not the best example.
and for a while, that was that. Now, Steven's view of his friends is obviously far less rigid and inhibiting than that of Homeworld's, but over the course of the movie, we discover that their identity and potential is even greater than he, or we, the audience, may have surmised. Yes, Steven brings back Amethyst relatively quickly, but they've always been the most similar, being the young Earth natives of the group that have the least historical intel, so that checks out. He still has to realize that Garnet isn't just defined by the fact that she's an illegal fusion,
Do you know me? I guess fusion was only the first piece.
and that Pearl isn't just defined by the fact that she rebelled against authority with Rose.
How could that not work? What are we missing?
Steven suggests that both are true when he attempts to bring back their memories by recreating these truths about them, but it's still not enough for either to get the picture. It's not the whole picture, and it's not the whole truth. They're just pieces. But the hardest test for Steven is not reaffirming his friend's beliefs, but getting his own ignorant, childlike character thrust upon him. His own young Steven, if you will. And by telling her more about the world in which she lives, he's directly at risk of creating his own arch nemesis. And that brings us to the real antagonistic force, the enemy of not just Steven Universe the movie, but the entire series.
The truth.
That's right. It's often easier to just, not tell the truth. Do you think Pink Diamond could have earned followers in her rebellion as easily if they knew she was truly, Pink Diamond? Do you think she would have done herself any favors in retaining that rebellion if she told the truth about how she got Bismuth and her fatal weapon out of the way? And yes, he also felt it was an easier, cleaner way to get rid of Spinel by telling her that her departure was part of a game, rather than just telling her that she didn't want to be her friend, rather than just telling her the truth. And now this movie shows us the Rejuvenator, a weapon that the Diamonds use on gems that step out of line, bringing them back to how they were when they were made. A memory eraser, yes, but a truth eraser just as well. And Steven's quest would be easier and cleaner if he just took that Rejuvenator and used it on Spinel after she turned off her injector. Ever hear the phrase, ignorance is bliss? If, as Steven says in this movie, that every experience you have is a piece of who you are, imagine not being given a single piece. Guys, if you don't have any of your pieces, if no one even gave you the box, you're not even gonna know there's a puzzle to solve. You're just gonna go about your life blissfully unaware. Much like characters did without someone to instigate a rebellion, focusing more on such silly priorities as, the limited availability of an ice cream sandwich? Or perhaps a fun little game in a garden? And it's arguably that very mindset that led Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl to keep Steven in the dark about gem history.
I know you just don't want me to be scared, but just tell me the truth.
And that very same mindset that led Pink Diamond to keep Spinel in the dark about, gem future. Ideals laid out to be blindly accepted as fact. The Diamond's bread and butter, really. But communication isn't about laying out ideals that the other person is just gonna blindly accept. And that's what the idealism of Steven Universe can seem like to a cynical outsider. Spinel genuinely thinks that Steven's essentially going to brainwash her near the end with the Rejuvenator.
We can just forget this ever happened. You mean I can just forget this ever happened?
Spinel even points out in a twisted way that ignorance was enjoyable for her, and maybe it's best to keep Garnet that way. Steven's morals are tested here, but he sticks to them and snaps that Rejuvenator in half, because Steven refuses to live in a universe modeled by his example, via the method of forcing another person to lose their agency. No, communication is a two-way street, and each of the 3 songs that ultimately break through the communication barrier for Amethyst, Pearl, and Garnet all, for lack of a better word, communicate this. Amethyst will keep her support system no matter what she becomes, Pearl will have a group that embraces her independence, and Garnet's loving relationship will withstand hardships and confusion as long as they're willing to face the truth together. Seeing the full picture of the puzzle, the happy ending, that final page, might sound gratifying in theory, but sometimes you don't like what you see. And sometimes you're left putting together a puzzle that someone else gave you, long after they've left you behind. Both Spinel and Steven face that fate from the very same puzzle maker.
You keep on turning pages for people who don't care about you.
Yes, we really got a first-class example of this concept when Spinel reached the apparent end of her story and didn't like it one bit. But this happens in the show too. When Steven heard that Rose shattered Pink Diamond, it messed him up bad. And that didn't even end up being the real truth, the real last page. No, what followed was even more disturbing. And more true. A happily ever after paints a complete picture. But if the picture keeps changing, you're never going to see the full picture. So does that mean working on the puzzle is a task in vain? Steven Universe the movie says no, because you're learning more from your experience, and you're gaining a greater understanding of the universe you live in. You can choose to look at a happily ever after as unattainable, or you can find a happily ever after in the accumulation of more puzzle pieces, the pursuit of growth, the process of change. And it is in this sense that happily ever after never ends. And that's the truth.
There's no such thing as happily ever after. I'll always have more work to do.